Hey, Whiskey Ringers. I am thrilled to welcome back Impex Beverages as the Whiskey Ring Podcast presenting sponsor. Each month, we'll be talking about a new set of single casks, maybe feature a chosen distillery, or single cask from a chosen distillery. Listen for the mid-roll for more info on this month's offerings. And now, a brand new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today we are going down to Texas, and I'm thrilled to bring on Dr. Ken Maverick of Maverick Distilling. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me. We're a little chilly down here right now, but enjoying a little wintry weather.
Yeah, we were chatting a little bit before starting recording, and as of today, as of the day we're recording, it's actually chillier down in San Antonio than it is here in New York City, which is ridiculous, but hey, what are we going to do about it?
Well, they say around here, winter is cold here if you're here the day it happens, and it happens to be today.
Fair. You've also had more snow than we've had, apparently, so even with flurries.
Yeah.
So absolutely insane. So so with Maverick Distilling, Maverick Whiskey, we're going to talk through not only the kind of incredible history that you guys have as a family in San Antonio, but also the nature of your whiskeys and spirits, because you've got a gin now and a rye, and just this idea of Texas whiskey and where Maverick fits or does not fit in there. So why don't we kick off as we always do? What's the Maverick whiskey story?
So it's kind of a nexus of a few things that came together. A few years back, I was really trying to record some of our family history, and my grandmother had given me this box of kind of old letters that I toted around with me for years. And finally, one summer, my wife and kids were visiting the in-laws, and I decided I wanted to scan them and get them digitally, kind of saved, for posterity, and started going through these. And there was this treasure trove of history. A lot of it was letters going back and forth between husband and wife and siblings. And, it kind of created this patchwork of live history, going way back to the 1800s. And then another kind of layer of that, I went to the archives in Austin and San Antonio and started digging through, kind of old family papers. And, the lives they lived back then were just so incredibly hard. There was always a theme of survival, and there was always a theme of, either whiskey or brandy or wine kind of along the way. At the same time, a buddy of mine had gotten back from Afghanistan and was talking about how they were doing some distillations maybe in some of the other parts of the encampment. And, was kind of showing him, some of these old papers. And he said, hey, we should try to, do some of this old cowboy whiskey. And so literally started on my back porch. I can actually probably zoom around and show you where it is. You can't see that on the podcast, but there's an awning back there that is basically where kind of our first iterations of some whiskeys began. And we put it in a barrel and left it a couple of years and started kind of passing it around friends. And at some point they said, gosh, you should do this. And at the same time, my wife may have a slightly different version of the story, but I had some we have a basement, kind of a root cellar in the bottom of our house, and I had some storage tanks there, and was doing a kind of a mash and a fermentation, and I hadn't quite vented one probably quite as well as it needed to be. And one night we hear this kind of pop and hissing that woke us up out of sleep, and we didn't know what it was. But she went down to the basement the next day, and our whole basement was just covered in corn mash. And she said, I love you, but can you do this somewhere else? And so at the same time, this old building downtown had gone for sale, and it just happened to be on our original family homestead across from the Alamo. And it was a 100-year-old bank building. We're next to where the original Maverick family homestead house was, and on the homestead proper. And so we decided to buy it, and took about 2 years to restore it. We crammed a distillery inside it, and convinced the city of San Antonio and about every other federal state agency that we can do this distillation downtown. Um, Meanwhile, I'd visited some distilleries in Chicago and Philadelphia, kind of downtown distilleries, and had our fire marshal, kind of reach out to try to help understand that, these big shiny vessels are not, bombs that are going to blow up. And we created a very modern, distillery in this old kind of bank building. And, to date, or have about 5-year-old bourbon, and I've done a lot of other interesting spirits along the way.
And we're definitely going to go more into that history of just the Maverick family. But your day job is, are you still working a day job as an
I'm
ophthalmologist?
a ophthalmologist, eye surgeon. Yeah, I've got 20 surgeries tomorrow morning. We've kind of
Oof.
kept the day job going, and I love it. I mean, there was never the intention to kind of give it up. And the business is a family business. We have gotten our kids involved, and they help with the restoration of the building. My wife, now runs a lot of it as well. She's also a physician. We're just running from down at the distillery. We finish our day job and usually kind of check and make sure things are going on there, going like they're supposed to. And our daughter helps handle the social media. I have another son who helps handle grounds around the barrel house and that sort of thing. So we're trying to impart on them, that kind of like our ancestors that inspired to make something out of nothing. And this has kind of been a family experiment, to that extent as well. And it's been hard, and there've been bumps and setbacks, and it's a hopefully a testament of survival and pushing through hard times. COVID was a big challenge for us. We turned our distillery into making hand sanitizer like a lot of other places, and gave it to city officials. And I'm in the healthcare field, so it hit very close where we just needed hand sanitizer, and so that was not in the job description of the business plan for sure, but we've tried to meet every challenge.
And I love the idea of the getting the building on the homestead, but also clearly the family business, having people, your daughter handling the social media, the son handling the grounds, your wife handling so many of the things around the distillery. It's you don't see that very often, to be pretty honest. It's usually like, I don't know, become someone's job, and then it's their whole life, and they kind of want to separate everything else from it. But it seems like it's a nice balance here, and I like hearing about it. And to that end, as you said, a couple of years ago, you got to digitize the memoirs of, let's see, this would be your great 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 grandmother, Mary Maverick.
Correct. Three greats to Sam and Mary,
Right.
who were the first kind of settlers to come to Texas and settle in San Antonio. And his story was, he was from very nice kind of family situation and Charleston and Pendleton, South Carolina. He was very agrarian. His interests were really viticulture and a lot of the local farming going on, and that's kind of where some of the history of the distillation and both with brandy and wines. He actually brought the first grapevines to Texas. Now, which is just a total side story, but he ran into a situation where way back then, if someone insults your father, you challenge them to a duel. And so he challenged this guy to a duel who was making disparaging remarks about his father, and won the duel, shot the guy, but he was not, someone who's violent or really a revolutionary. He brought the gentleman to his house and nursed him back to health. And I tell my kids this: always be nice to everybody, because even if you shoot them, you never know later in life when that may come back around. And so the man's name was John C. Calhoun, who was the son of another prominent politician in South Carolina. And they were kind of involved in the, secession versus non-secession. And so what happens when you shoot the senator's son is you got to leave town. And so Sam Maverick went to Texas. And so he'd had a Yale law education, and then really wanted to kind of seek his own, fortune initially by surveying around San Antonio, and he built up this kind of collection of maps that when the Texas Revolution started, he was not a revolutionary, but he had really good maps of the city. And when some of the other Texians who were trying to retake the city needed navigation, they made him their guide because he knew the city streets and kind of where the houses and hideouts were. And so there was a gentleman named Milam, Ben Milam, of the Milam and Green lineage, who was a colonel who tapped Sam Maverick to help him retake the city. And they did, but Ben Milam took a bullet, a musket ball in his head, standing right next to Sam Maverick, and fell into his arms and died. And so, if you go back far enough, there are these connections that are, just really kind of intimate, even between, two whiskey distilleries now, Milam and Maverick. And so, so Maverick ended up staying in San Antonio and became indoctrinated into kind of the revolutionary force that was defending the Alamo. But he left. He was sent and elected to go sign the Texas Declaration of Independence 2 days before the massacre. So he got to live, basically, and he always harbored this survivor's guilt that he, his 187 buddies sent him to go get help, and the help was too late. So he made his home next to the Alamo, and that's where the homestead is. And that's how that piece of property got to be there, because he always vowed to, honor their memory. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do now, is to keep some of these stories and memories alive, alongside our spirits.
And I mean, I had some time to look through not the whole thing, but just some of the memoirs of Mary Maverick, linked right from the Maverick Distilling website. And the picture it paints is just one of not only the life that was lived, but it's visceral, I think, which is the most important thing. It really gives you a sense of it. And the way that the history is intertwined through the larger things, I mean, shot in a duel, so I guess you could argue legally shot John C. Calhoun. As you said, he nursed him back to health, but given Texas's kind of status at that time, he literally had to leave the country to
right. And I mean, a lot of Americans were going to Texas at the time, which was precisely the problem that Santa Anna, excuse me, was trying to really quell, because there was what was called the Mexican Constitution of 1824, which is pretty revolutionary. It gave women the right to vote and own land. It freed slaves. It was a real democracy, but it also gave Americans, kind of privilege from taxes, and also they had land ownership in this, territory, essentially. And so many were coming that the Mexican government, was feeling threatened by that. And so really the flag that flew above the Alamo was a Mexican flag with 1824 on it. They weren't necessarily, claiming that they wanted to be, separate from Mexico, but they wanted the Mexican government to honor at least those laws that Santa Anna was not. And that's our version of history. We had a contingent of Mexican generals in the building not too long ago, and we're telling the story, and one of them leaned over to me and he said, that's not exactly how we see it. So, but what was neat is there were Mexican and American generals really having a summit in San Antonio and planning security type things, that we're sitting around having a whiskey together. And I look at that table and I was like, this is exactly why we did this, is to try to bring people together and remember history and respect history. And it's been layers and layers of it. You mentioned Mary Maverick. I mean, Sam's legacy is remarkable, but if you read her diaries, I mean, she was really even more remarkable, because while he was off, kind of pioneering and exploring, she was home with, the 10 kids, fighting off Indians and trying to get the kids fed, and, going to the river, getting water, and, hoping her 2-year-old wouldn't get into a rattlesnake, and so life was really hard, especially on women back then. And so, part of our, journey, and that with my wife, is, this, trying to make something out of nothing, and family too. I mean, that's really, really a theme.
And you've kind of got a rare situation too, in that you have not only a long family history, but a long family history in one place of, 7-8 generations now. And as far as the whiskey world goes, the list of names that have that in earnest are pretty slim. I mean, arguably the Beams, Kentucky, Eric Wolf in Pennsylvania with Stolen Wolf, but really not many that are continuous histories, and neither in the same place. So it presents a really unique situation for you, in which you can kind of exploit's not the right word that I want to use, but like exploit that history for good, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, we're trying to tell, a lot of these stories, and, it's interesting reading a lot of these. This goes back to this box my grandmother gave me. A lot of these firsthand, letters and notations, aren't exactly maybe what was in textbooks, or, maybe the story changed along the way. And everybody has their own version of history, I guess, and we respect that. But we also kind of look back at some of the events, and can say, that maybe that wasn't exactly how it happened, because a firsthand observer said it was this way. So there have been some interesting events just in San Antonio history and along the way. And this was multiple generations. I mean, it really started with Mary, and part of her story is remarkable because she was literate, and she literally just wrote down everything she saw. And much of San Antonio's early history is based on her diaries, because a lot of it disappeared when the Mexican army went through, and then was restarted when they resettled San Antonio. And so she was the first Anglo woman in San Antonio, and the first Anglo woman really to have a family, and was bilingual, and integrated well. And we could learn a lot of lessons by the way they carried themselves. Behind our building, there's a park called Travis Park, and it's actually the second oldest public space in America. It was founded shortly after the Boston Common, and Sam Maverick donated the park to the city. He was essentially a land developer, and he bought land and parceled it up, and was trying to develop this area. And so, and this was in the late 1830s, 1840s, where he donated a parcel on every corner of the park to a different denomination church. And there was an Episcopal church, there was a temple, there was a Methodist church and a Baptist church, and at some point there was a little Catholic chapel, all along this park called Travis Park, which he named in honor of his friend Travis, who died in the Alamo. And so, that's where really the center of the city, and kind of the cultural center of the city, started. And it's right in the middle of downtown San Antonio. And so it's kind of stories like that we can look back, and it was pretty revolutionary for the 1800s, just to say, hey, we need to be diverse, and kind of integrated, and all get along. So that's just kind of one of the stories that goes along with the whiskey.
Absolutely. And one more purely history question before getting into the whiskey itself. Uh, I wanted to ask, because this came up on the Maverick Distilling website, and it was just struck me that, number one, I mean, it circles back to, again, Civil War because of the John C. Calhoun affair,
Mm-hmm.
and then later on, after Texas independence,
Right.
Union, that Sam Maverick supported Sam Houston in his rally to support the Union during the American Civil War, but he voted for secession as a member of the convention.
Right.
And I was curious if you found any kind of explanation for that duality.
So, one of the kind of deepest and kind of more interesting parts of both he and Mary writing letters to each other was this kind of situation, and that's the Calhoun duel was basically over. Maverick was pro union but living in the South.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there are lots of complexities to that, but that really transferred over to Texas, where they were very pro keeping the states together, but at the same time, this is where they lived, and they had multiple sons in the Confederate Army at the same time, because they were, at base, kind of felt like they're defending their land, and so, they, in his mind, and I mean, I would love to delve deeper into this. He never reconciled it. When he felt, even to, I think the day he died, that he would, was didn't want to turn his back on his brethren who he lived, but his heart was not there, and his mind was not there. And so, an incredibly complex situation where, I think he was, in his mind, he was trying to keep the peace and, make the best decision for, probably his family. But when, one of the more remarkable things is when the Confederacy was surrendered in San Antonio, he was tapped as the representative, and not one drop of blood was shed. When that happened, and that was pretty rare around the country at that time. And then, going back to the annexation of Texas, just prior to that, his relationship with Calhoun was really what kind of greased the wheels, if you will, because they had a history together and they had a trust. And he was Secretary of State under, I believe, James K. Polk then. And the annexation of Texas was a slippery slope because they didn't want to start a war with Mexico. But they kind of navigated this political maelstrom, and without, but I mean, very gracefully, I guess. And that's that's a neat part of the story. And I wish we had some more details of that, but we really just know kind of from his firsthand diaries. And sometimes there was just a one-liner or a paragraph that day that probably had some huge historical significance, but then he started talking about his grapevines, because that's where his heart was. So in everyday life,
Is that he was an agrarian rather than more than anything else.
It really was. I mean, I think that's how he viewed himself.
So with that, I think it's a perfect segue into the whiskey and the spirits. So in addition to bringing the grapevines to Texas and having his own whiskey recipe, I did want to mention first that he was also known for his brandies, particularly from peaches and figs, I believe they were.
Correct.
Do you know, was that kind of like before the whiskey, or was he kind of into whiskey at the same time?
It was alongside. Even going back to the South Carolina history, the brandy and the fruit was readily available, and moving west, it didn't transport so well. And what did transport well west was grain, but grain was heavy, and the best way to transport it was in a liquid form in a barrel. And so initially, in his a lot of this came from a tradition where he would buy or acquire a parcel of land. And back then there was the Chihuahuan Mexican government, there was the Mexican federal government, there was the San Antonio kind of local government, and then there was the US government. And it wasn't always very clear, where the deed sat or where the law fell, for 30 years of this, or really till the probably past the Civil War, because the Confederate government was part of it as well. And so many of these dealings were, you had to trust the guy. And because there were two deeds, and one said one thing and one said the other, and so it really was a handshake and a barrel of whiskey. And so that was one of the kind of lines, and even Mary in her diaries talked about this, where he was as good as his word, and that's how he was effective, I think. And it's that real authenticity that we've tried to make prevalent in both our business, but then also in our spirits. But back to the whiskey, he would initially import the whiskey, even down from Bourbon, Kentucky. It spent a year going down the Mississippi, and then would go through the port of New Orleans, usually across the Gulf again, and then back through Houston or one of the ports, or Galveston, in that area. And it took about 2 years to get to San Antonio, sloshing around in this barrel. By that time, it was pretty good. And so there was an Indian raid that basically the Indian raid decimated a year's worth of supplies, and one of the supplies was their supply of whiskey. And that's where we started seeing that the brandy and some of the whiskeys, they were, you couldn't just go to the local liquor store and order them up. And so they started, San Antonio started being more settled and being able to have some of those provisions to do that. But he did have some local farms and a vineyard. The Travis Park was where they grew the peaches for his brandy. And then, the grapes were, part of that along the way too, where they talked about wine. So it was really multiple, types of spirits, and they did along the way, just as part of the cultural experience of living there. It never went bad. And he said this, it never went bad. It only got more valuable with time, and the locals loved it. And I think the locals, he was referring to the Indian population.
Absolutely. So the part of the legacy and the history is you have some old recipes of the whiskey that have come through your family. Now, I'm not totally clear on this, so you can feel free to clear this up. But I don't think they came all the way from great great grandfather Sam Maverick, but still about a century ago, something like that. Is that correct?
Right. So yeah. So I mean, we've kind of pieced together, the history going back, and I mean, I did a lot of research on kind of what whiskey was, in 1840, 1860, and it obviously it wasn't regulated, and local bars and saloons would add all sorts of stuff, molasses, gunpowder, turpentine, to color it, and then obviously proof it down, where the word proof comes from, to make it a different kind of proof, usually lower proof. And so we kind of triangulated, and this is with a buddy who came back from Afghanistan, what that would look like in 1840, 1860, and then in some of the great grandchildren and that sort of thing, we did start seeing some mentions, and how they were doing this in grandpa's mash bill and that sort of thing. And so that there are bits and pieces that we put together along the way, and obviously we can't put molasses in our modern day TTB approved whiskey or gunpowder, but we've stuck to what the ingredients they would have at the time. We stick to all Texas grown corn. We get all our winter rye from the Panhandle, barley from the Panhandle. Our corn is grown locally. Right down I-90, which is right outside of San Antonio, and it has a little different, call it kind of terroir. South Texas corn is a little more sweet than, probably Midwestern corn, Indiana type corn, and so our bourbon tends to be a little sweeter. And it is what it is. It's our Texas whiskey, and it's not exactly a Kentucky or Tennessee whiskey, but that's the whole point. Is it's a little different.
It is, and I've had the pleasure of trying the Samuel Maverick Private Reserve Texas Straight Bourbon Whiskey, and I first got this actually back in September, and been nursing it kind of ever since. And it does have a particular flavor to it. Like it's different. It's not. I don't think there's quite a Texas flavor profile, if you will, at this point.
Right.
And it's speaking statewide, but in a in a previous event that I think met you for the first time at, one of the things that you and Kevin Graham, your distiller,
right,
mentioned was that I'm not really trying to be a Texas whiskey. It's more just the fact that it's a whiskey or a bourbon or rye from Texas, as opposed to some other brands that are kind of taking it a little more directly. Like, yes, this is a Texas whiskey. It's a
right.
Texas bourbon. And what is that separation kind of meant for you as you've developed the brand?
I mean, our kind of mission is to kind of stay as local and kind of true to that, the process I just mentioned as possible. And so we have been able to source, everything from Texas. We tried to even age in some Texas live oak, but because of our seasons, our oak is much drier. It basically tastes like turpentine. So there's a reason why good American white oak comes from the Midwest or Minnesota. And, some things you can't reinvent. And there's just a reason why that's the best in class. But, as far as the, kind of who we are, I mean, we haven't tried to be anybody else, but, kind of Maverick whiskey. And, part of the mission was to, stay as local and try to stay to Texas products. And fortunately, it's a big place, and that may may go to what you said, where there are some different profiles. Northern Texas corn is different than South Texas corn, because there's 1,200 miles in between as well. And so, I mean, we've really just tried to be us, and haven't really tried to imitate or mimic. Obviously there's some processes that we go to other distilleries and have great respect, and we all have something to learn from each other. But we didn't really put too much thought or engineering, even though like our barrel storage, it's just we're going to store it here, and it's going to have our own local taste. And if you store it in our bank vault, there's really nobody else in the world who can mimic that environment. We've since built a couple of barrel houses in South Bexar County, which is we just needed more room, and those are surrounded by cactus fields and red dirt, and I call it whiskey heaven, where I feel like our barrels are happy there, and that's where we get a unique flavor.
And, I mean, there are two things that.
So I don't.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I guess long way to say, like, I don't know exactly what a Texas whiskey is or what that profile is, but I know we're one of them. I guess just because we're not, we're really trying to kind of keep a tight circle on our sourcing and ingredients, and really make it unique to this region.
Right, and so we got to go into the maturation a little bit, but before we do, On the question of oak, so where do you get your barrels from?
I mean, most of it is from Missouri or Minnesota. I mean, we source from a couple of different barrel houses, kind of depending on, but I mean, they're, heart of Midwest, tight grain, white oak. We do a number three for most of our whiskeys, and so that's um, that the live oak Texas barrels just taste more like turpentine. So the Midwestern oak is definitely the way to go.
I hear you. It's did a write up on the difference between tight grain and like a fine grain or an open grain and what that means for the whiskey. So kind of fits. And you're working 30-gallon barrels, right?
So we have a mix of both. Initially, we did all 30s as we were getting going, but we're starting to put into 53s now. And so we've been laying down, I guess 5 years now. And so we're starting to get a nice little library of barrels. We did some just pure wheat along the way. We may talk about, we've done a triticale whiskey that's unique. And, we'll probably get into a little blending of our own stuff, before long, but, we're really just trying to get our, kind of our core products, really starting to be out there. I mean, we're really just starting to have like the private reserve, something that, we feel like, we want to share with the world.
Sure, absolutely. So definitely want to be trying and keeping an eye out for the triticale and the wheat whiskeys because love
Yes.
alternative grains. Um, so into the skipping ahead to the maturation process, this private reserve was notable because it came from 7 barrels from the bank vault.
Correct.
So before we get to the barrel houses that are out by the cacti, let's talk about the bank vault and why. I guess the why of why you put the barrels in there kind of makes sense. It's, if nothing else, it's certainly unique, but the why behind it, but also just more about like what does that do for it, and have you second guessed it at all?
No, I mean, it's a unique microclimate, first of all. And so, we weren't 100% sure. I mean, I did bring kind of engineers in, and we tried to, see what the, kind of the cycles were, as far as what the temperature does. It's subterranean essentially. And so, it generally stays cooler, but probably unique to San Antonio. We're probably the only building downtown that has a ventilation system that brings outside air into the basement, and so we pump it in, and that basically mimics the outdoor ambient temperature. And so when it's 100 degrees outside in San Antonio, our bank vault is about 95, and so we do get a day and night gradient, sometimes about 20 degrees. And then, around, the cycle of, summer, fall, winter, there's another cycle of kind of cool and warm. The humidity is relatively high down there. And, the real reason we used it is because that's the space we had available.
Sure.
And so, but we knew it was, I knew it was going to be kind of a unique, unique process there. And it does seem, along the way, when we had a 1-year-old whiskey, it was more reminiscent of a 2-year-old. And when we had a 2-year-old, it was more reminiscent of a 4-year-old. And so, we seem to be getting, good turnover and good, kind of infusion in and out of the wood, which is, the whole game. We looked at some, kind of ideas of pressurizing it. But the engineer basically said if we create like a negative pressure, the building would basically collapse into the basement. And so, we had some, kind of harebrained ideas, but at the end of the day, we're just letting really the ambient air do the job, and it's done a pretty good job.
The newest line from Impex Beverages has arrived. Hakata whiskey is distilled and matured in Fukuoka, Japan by the Hikari Distillery, using 100% barley with a touch of koji fermentation to add savory umami to the pours. 4 expressions are currently available: the 10-year, 12-year, 16-year, and 18-year. All are fully matured in first fill and refill Oloroso and PX sherry casks, then bottled at 42% ABV. Each release speaks to a different palate, and each is truly unique. If you love sherry dominance, go for the 10-year. The 12-year adds reminders of red wine sangria and a stone fruit salad. The 16-year lessens the sherry influence a bit to open juicy fruit and bubble tape gum, jelly donuts, taking your thought to the boldest of the bold Australian Cabernet Sauvignons and offering a demi-glace-like mouthfeel. Finally, the 18-year-old returns to those sherry roots, bolstered by the Australian red sensations from the 16-year and inky black Tempranillo wine feelings, imparting black cherry, golden raisins, and dark honey in Lady Grey tea. Each of these expressions brings a different dimension to the sherry, and there is truly one for every palate. Go to impexbev.com/Hakata, that's Hakata, to find out more, and grab a bottle at your favorite premium whiskey shop today. Hey, Whiskey Ringers. I hope you've been taking advantage of that podcast-only code for the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society. They've got around 20 bottlings coming out each month, and there's never a shortage of new things to explore. To take advantage of this podcast-only offer, please go to smwsa.com, that's Scotch Malt Whiskey Society of America, and put in code WRP for Whiskey Ring Podcast at checkout for 25% off your first year subscription. And so what is an early 20th century bank vault look like in terms of because we think of a rick house, we think of pretty thin walls, wood, airflow, some sun.
Yeah.
Vault not so much. So
the vault was made. The Lockwood Bank was built and they're finished in 1918, and it was billed as the first burglar-proof bank west of the Mississippi. Okay, and San Antonio was the largest city west of the Mississippi at that time, and so it's got 1 and 2 foot thick walls. So when we were redoing it, I mean, the contractors, we were trying to sink like a rod in the floor to be like a ground wire, for the building.
Mm.
And I mean, they went through bits and bits and bits, and they couldn't drill through it. I mean, it's 2 or 3 feet thick, and this is the concrete that was made 100 years ago, and it's a little better quality than the concrete now. I mean, it's just hard to steel, and so it doesn't. The concrete doesn't breathe, but there are parts of the vault that are that were not that are open now, that weren't part of the storage of money, that kind of breathed with the limestone around it. Before it was a bank, it was a firehouse. Sam Maverick had donated the city for that land to be a firehouse, because when you're a landowner in downtown and in the 1800s and the city's full of wooden buildings, where do you want the firehouse? You want it in your backyard. And so there was a cistern that's now part of that, kind of excavation that was in the area. And the walls are different there. It's more like limestone. And so, it breathes, I guess, is the point. And, that's where some of the humidity, comes in and out of. But it's not dank. The air is fresh. I mean, it smells like whiskey now, which is the beautiful thing. I mean, you walk down there and, that's how I think heaven smells. It's a unique, it's fun for people giving tours, and the answer is we didn't know exactly how it was going to turn out, but we've monitored it and kind of learned from it. And those 7 barrels we picked were just the best we found of what's down there now, and we're starting to restack and rotate from what we're doing now, because it's turned out pretty well.
And so you've got on one side this it's underground, it's a very controlled environment, and then you've got the new barrel houses that are out by the cacti and the red dirt. So
right.
What is that like?
So I mean, these are more traditional buildings. There is ventilation built in them. And this is where we're able to kind of stack barrels. The temperature variation is slightly more certainly in the summer, just because it's out and unexposed. And so those may have a slightly different profile, but we're monitoring it. I mean, we're not hadn't even pulled those yet. There's there's a what's really kind of the family recipe that we've been laying down out there that we haven't even given a name yet. So we still have another one that's coming in short term, but we'll keep you posted on that.
I mean, for those barrel houses, obviously, as you said, there's going to be a higher diurnal shift. Do you have to like pump in more humidity there too, just to keep things from drying out?
It's actually relatively humid. The we do have a well there, and a system that we're keeping the grounds watered, and just to kind of keep it moist around the barrel houses, just so there's not a fire risk essentially. And so the relative humidity inside there rarely goes below excuse me 40%. And we do have a ventilation system that blows off heat. We didn't want it 140 degrees in there, and so we don't let it get generally above about 100 degrees in the summer, even when it's 110 out.
All right, so you go.
So that diurnal bumps in between in the wintertime between about 80 and 100 degrees, and in the summertime, it's between. I'm sorry, summertime is between 80 and 100. Wintertime, it may be between this time of year between like 50 and 70. And so we're seeing a little wider spread, but the same kind of diurnal spread.
All right, so you got like
It's not too far from downtown San Antonio. It's like 20 miles south, and that temperature gradient, on a daily basis might be 2 to 4 degrees. It's not huge. Downtown is also a little warmer because there's just a lot of concrete, and so there's not as big a variation as you would think.
No, certainly. I never thought about humidity, even going down to Kentucky in the summer, which was kind of rough. I never thought of humidity with the rick houses until the last day of that trip to Kentucky, and then talking to Colin over at Santa Fe Spirits, and then Mark over at Whiskey Del Bach, where they've got Santa Fe Spirits has basically like 0% humidity, so they have to spray the barrels.
Yeah, I mean our relative humidity, it's generally between 60 and 80%. San Antonio is pretty humid.
Yeah. So to bring in the kind of process of the whiskey itself, so you're working with local grains, Texas grown corn, a Brut C rye, which in itself, we won't have time to go into that one, but a Brut C should be familiar to listeners of the podcast, and malted barley as well. So
correct.
Right now, I believe you got the recipe of the 72% corn, 18 rye, and 10% malted barley.
Correct.
And that's from reconstruction of history. That's kind of what you found as grandpa's recipe in a way.
No, that's actually that's one of the kind of traditional recipes. The grandpa's recipe is the one we hadn't released yet. So okay. We're still aging that. Yeah. So that has a name in my mind, and I promise you we'll talk about it soon. But we're waiting until it gets a little older, and just want to kind of hold something back a little bit. So
sure. So I'm guessing that we won't be able to answer that question about what's that mash bill like quite yet. We'll save that for when that comes out.
It's there's a little wheat in it. That's I'll give a little teaser.
Fair enough. So this being more of a traditional recipe, then how'd you settle on this one first before starting to distill the kind of family heritage recipe?
I mean, we had kind of done both side by side, but the family heritage recipe, I kind of wanted to hold back. I mean, that's the one that is going to be kind of our platinum level, I think, and it's been aging well, and so it has a little, it has a unique character. I mean, we just wanted to do just a solid bourbon, and try to keep it pretty classic, and the from the outset, we just wanted to, I worked with our distiller, at the time, and we did some taste testing, and as it's coming out of the still, this mash bill it just seemed to be solid, and it worked with our still, and it worked with our supplier, and sometimes you just do what God gives you, and this was we wanted to have a solid when we start really putting out to the masses, kind of a building block. And so we're proud of this one. We think it's turned out well. We're continuing to age it, and we'll probably do a more aged version of this as well. I mean, we're watching these barrels age, and we don't, again, we're a small family business here. I mean, I had kind of a 10-year plan going in, but some of this is my kids' problem. Where they're got to figure out what to do with some of this, good old bourbon too. So
Not a bad problem to pass on for sure. So I guess the other question with the grains was, when you were first talking about starting the distillery, was the idea of keeping the grain local and immediately part of that plan?
It was, there's some things that are just not good in Texas, like the oak, and so, like in our gin recipe, we tried to use some local juniper, and it's kind of like the oak. It tastes like turpentine, and so it just wasn't good. And so we went back to using traditional juniper, either from the Northeast or even from Northern Europe. Uh, the whiskey, and the grains in Texas, were, I knew going into it that we could source these. Our partner, actually in the Panhandle of all things, the name is the Maverick Malt House. No relation whatsoever, but we've been working with them from the very beginning, and the Texas Panhandle is really on the latitude of Kansas, and even touches Nebraska, and so there's a stripe of it there, where there's a real breadbasket, and grain prices have certainly elevated in the last couple of years, but I mean we've had a pretty good steady source. We've had a little bit of a drought in South Texas, and so we were a little worried about the corn, and being able to get it, and I want to say in mass, but I mean we use tons and tons and tons of it in a year, and some of the local farms have been struggling to produce it, and we're a small buyer, but so far we haven't had any issue. And a lot of the farmers, you build a relationship like everything else, and they're like, you know what, you can go first, you can be first on the list, because I want my corn to be whiskey. And so there's usually a bottle of whiskey in it for them too, though.
It helps, always helps. I did a side note. I did a private pick of a Jack Daniels pick a year and a half ago or so, and
Neat.
I got to keep the barrel, and I've kept many of the bottles that came from the bot. And whenever I have a gift to give, I would like to keep most of them for myself because I love it. But
Yeah.
it's a good little thing. It was like, oh, I forgot to get something. Okay, literally go into the barrel and pick out a bottle.
Wow, that's neat.
So
That's neat.
it's good. It works. All right. So,
but we have a solid supply of corn, of wheat, of barley and rye, that are in Texas. There's a good sugar source for our rum. Most of the even botanicals in our gin are local, or we gather from like grapefruit from the Texas Valley, and a lot of the botanicals we can easily grow around here. But the grains we've had a pretty solid supply of.
And what kind of convinced you to go in the direction of creating a rye?
Um, it just seemed like, something we needed to do if you're a distillery. A lot of this is, let's see if we can do it. And, the things on the shelves aren't necessarily the first, iteration of what we put out there, but the grains are good here. One thing, and this is really the thread of a lot of these Texas distilleries is, kind of like Kentucky, we have really good water. And so the we sit on an aquifer that is a heavily limed kind of aquifer, and it's great for brewing. It's great for distilling. We had designed a very complex water system within our distillery, basically removing the fluoride from the city water. But then, other than that, we have in San Antonio really some of the best water, in the United States, and it's relatively, inexpensive. And we've that's kind of the common thread, and that's really how San Antonio got founded. All cities way back when were founded on rivers or water sources, and we had some springs around here, not far from our distillery, that we're producing like 15,000 gallons a day, as a water source. And so, or there, there's kind of a story where my great uncle, actually in the bank building where we have the distillery, got together with a guy he knew from St. Louis because he lived there. His name was Adolphus Bush, and they formed the first brewery in San Antonio called the Lone Star Brewery, in basically where our building was. And so the Lone Star Brewery originally sat, about a mile up the San Antonio River from where we are right now. And that's been kind of the common thread of distilleries and breweries around San Antonio, Austin, Dripping Springs, is we have good water.
I mean, it's true. Kentucky and Tennessee both pride themselves on this idea of the limestone water. It's so great; it can only be made there because of the limestone shelf. And then you realize limestone's pretty much, it's not everywhere, but it's in a lot of places.
It's
Yeah.
ubiquitous. Yeah.
We've got one, we sit on one here in New York. There's a bigger one up north. There's one,
Yeah.
around the Great
Yeah.
Lakes. Like there's limestone everywhere. So, and even when there isn't, frankly, we've got the technology nowadays to just deionize and reverse osmosis the iron
Hmm.
out. So it's not, I don't know. I like the story aspect of it, but I think it's
Hmm.
had its day in terms of practicality.
Yeah. I mean, and at the end of the day, when we proof it down, we take everything out anyway. And so, but our distillery has, and I think we have seven types of water, I call them, as we have city water, obviously, which we use in toilets and things like that in the kitchen. We have a hot and cold, um, city water that we have the fluoride removed, and we really don't have high iron. I mean, our tap water is as good as really anywhere in the country. Um, and then we have some reverse osmosis water that we use and make there. And then we also have kind of a soft water system that we use for some of our machinery and that sort of thing. And so we've got a lot of water lines, but in the design of the distillery, is necessary, and it's given us some flexibility as well.
And, to go into just in the time we have left, some of the kind of nitty gritty of it. Uh, so, kind of who helped you design the distillery and where to get the stills?
So I went up to Koval and Cove, Dr. Berkner, and kind of taken his course, and kind of drank some of their Kool-Aid. And so we hired Cote, and who made our still and all our mash system, and we had everything automated, traditional copper still, but we can run it with a cell phone. And monitor it. And part of us being in downtown San Antonio, and the education of the kind of fire and safety officials was, we've had our still in our kind of control box is literally wired to the fire station, and so they can see what our still is doing and the temperature if they ever want to. We've never had an issue, and we knew we probably wouldn't, but it's kind of educated them. Another distillery popped up right across the alley from us, Devil's River. Thought we had a good spot, I think, and so they put a distillery down there, and we welcome more because we're really hoping the downtown kind of turns into a craft distillery or craft brewery type destination. Tasting notes and smells we try to infuse into the bourbon, hopefully from some of the history and just the aura of it.
Couldn't say it better. Very well. Dr. Maverick, Ken, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Whiskey Ring podcast to talk about Maverick Distilling, Maverick Whiskey. We've certainly got some more to look forward to over the next few years between the wheat, the triticale, the family heritage, whatever that name may be.
And the triticale is available. I have to tell one more story.
Yeah.
So the triticale came from it was an accident basically, and so we'd ordered a bunch of rye, and we're doing a rye fermentation, and it kept bubbling over. And I went a month of weekends just cleaning up a mess on the distillery floor, and we couldn't figure out what was going on until myself and our distiller actually took the grain to my ophthalmology microscope and looked at it, and it was like, this is not rye. It had a different look. I didn't know what it was, and so we called the malt house, Maverick Malt House, and they said, we're very sorry, we mislabeled our rye and sent you something called triticale. And I had no idea what that was. I looked it up, and it's this kind of hybrid grain of that was developed centuries ago of rye and wheat, but it's not exactly like blending rye and wheat like you might do. And so we had several fermentations of this, and I told our distiller, all right, well, let's distill it and put it in a barrel and see what happens. And so we pulled it out last summer, I guess 18 months ago, and it was like, you know what, this is, it's unique. And it tastes kind of like a classic whiskey, but we couldn't really put our thumb on it, and it kind of has a unique flavor all its own. And kind of research, and somebody had done, there've been a couple of triticales done along the way from various distilleries, but we're putting it in a few of the competitions this year and kind of see how it does. So total accident, total happenstance, but put it in a barrel for a few years and it's always better.
True. Yeah, I look forward to hopefully getting the chance to try it, because as I said, a couple of distilleries have done either a full triticale or partial triticale whiskey, and to be honest, at least for my profile, no one's been quite successful at it yet. Like, I haven't found exactly the right thing, but who knows, maybe I'll try yours and it'll be the one that's like, all right, that's the one. But we'll
get you some. We'll make it happen.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much. I really appreciate taking the time talking about, I love history. I'm kind of an addict of history right now, and a recovering medievalist. So anytime we get to dig back into the records, I love that kind of stuff. Hang on with me for a sec after we finish recording, just to close out a few things. But in the meantime, of course, as usual, when this episode comes out, there will be reviews for anything that gets taste, tasting notes, links to social media, to the Maverick Distilling website, where you can order for I think 41 states, something like that, high 30s, low 40s.
Correct.
41 states. Correct. So it is available, and as I said, it's one of those whiskeys that it's different and it's worth a try, and I quite liked it. I've had the private reserve, and yeah, there'll be links to everything. Make sure to follow on Whiskey Ring at Twitter, Whiskey My Wedding Ring, and Whiskey Ring Podcast on Instagram and on Facebook. Join the Whiskey Ringers Facebook group, and if you can, leave 5-star rating and review, support on Patreon, and I will see you next week.
All right. Thank you.
Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.